Alex Levy, and you're watching the Paris 2024 Summer Games only on UBN. Vous serez au premier rang pour découvrir les moments les plus palpitants des Jeux 因为现在以往任何时候都更需要感受到新的慢悠的色的美。在今天的晚上，无论是在家里的时候，无论是在外头，我这样子的都听到的是Bring the world wherever you call home.
Welcome to the future.
My name is Randy Nichols.
Hello,
and
I'm Alex Levy,
yeah,
and
you
you're
can
watching the
just
Paris.
once is enough. If you're new here, I'm not the pastor. I'm filling in for the pastor today. He will be here next week for a rebuttal. And so let me tell you about my world. My day job is I'm a professor of professional development, which means I help students, upper class undergraduate students, get ready for what comes next after college. One of the things that I've noticed is AI can be a helpful tool if it's used right. So my students, sometimes they use AI to help them with their resumes and their cover letters. This is an important part of what we do. We make sure our students have good resumes, good cover letters. And what I've discovered is if they use the right prompts, if they feed in all the job description requirements and all their own experiences and all the data, and they ask AI to generate a resume, it comes out pretty good. It's well formatted. It has nice fonts and headers. Everything is bulleted right. It matches the job description to their experience and degrees and learning. And their cover letters. Words are spelled correctly. But there's kind of been a blowback to this because hiring professionals are saying this. They're saying everything is right, but it all looks the same. It's hard to see anything that really stands out because everybody's using AI to make their cover letters and resumes better. The voice of the student seems to get lost in it. Now, I can't tell you how conflicting this is for a professor. Do you know how long we've tried to get them to spell words the same way? I know Mark Twain said it's an unimaginative person that only spells a word one way, but we've been trying to get them to use grammar. So on one way, we've succeeded, but on the other way, there's been some problem. This is another force in what we've already seen in our society, in the world around us, and that is this big pressure of conformity to make things kind of the same. And in your world, it's the same. Have you seen movies in the last 30 years? Show us movies. Alex, movies for 100. There we go. I imagine at some point they're going to have Vin Diesel's ashes in an urn for Fast and Furious 52, strapped in the seat, and Avengers. But let me just say, if you have trouble keeping up with the Avengers universe, you're not going to make it with the Star Wars franchise, because I think they have Luke Skywalker's cousin's cat slated for a series next year. And if you listen to music, have you ever thought that music tends to sound alike? It's actually a study. This is an old study from like 10 years ago or so. Music tends to sound alike, and there's algorithmic reasons behind that that seem to just make it more and more and more conformed to a particular sound. And I've got to ask you, anybody in here, just raise your hand. Do you have a gray SUV? Anybody got a gray SUV? There's one here, 2, 3. I probably tried to get in your car accidentally because cars, have you noticed? You've probably seen this meme where they show the color cars of the past, different designs, different colors, and now everything's a gray or white SUV. You need to be careful to remember where you parked else you're going to have some problem narrowing it down. There is this overwhelming zeitgeist of conformity, right, that we deal with. And so what I want today is I want to look at this power of conformity as it relates to a story in the Bible in Daniel chapter 1. And I thank Brandy for putting in so many notes. If something happens to me mid-sermon, you could finish with the notes. They're pretty good in the Bible app. But we'll put some verses up. Daniel chapter 1. Let me set this up for you with a little bit of background. This is happening in the kingdom of Judah. As you know, when the 12 tribes of Israel came into the promised land, they kind of divided into two, 10 tribes, which we call Israel, and the other 2 tribes, or was it 3, because maybe 3, called Judah. Judah as a kingdom had some kings that had gotten away from God's plan. Now, somewhere along the way, there is one good king, Josiah, that comes in. He realizes he tries to do his best, but he is followed by kings who fall back into the same pattern. Jehoiakim, Jehoahaz. By the way, that's a little traumatic. That's the first Bible quiz test I failed in college. Trying to remember Jehoahaz, Jehoahad, Jehoiakim, Jehoiakim. That's tough. And Jehu thrown in there too, just for good measure. But what has happened is spiritually, they were cruising for a bruising, right? The kingdom of Judah. Politically, they were depending on Egypt's power to protect them from the massive power of Babylon. Well, the king, Jehoiakim, thought, since we got the big, Egypt here with us, we'll just stop paying tribute. But shortly after that, Babylon defeats Egypt in this big battle, and then they come saying, oh, you thought you were going to trust Egypt, huh? And you hadn't been paying your tribute. And so they lay siege to Jerusalem. Babylon surrounds them, and they finally get Jerusalem to surrender. That's where we pick up the story in Daniel chapter 1. And so Babylon defeats Judah, and as was the custom, they looted the treasures and took captives. Look at Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 through 2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put the treasure of God in his house. Will Rogers, you might have heard of Will Rogers, the great humorist. He said this, he says, America has never lost a war or won a war settlement. If you got beat by America, pretty much that's a guarantee, Japan, Germany, we're going to come and rebuild your country more modern and more efficiently. So we'll have to actually buy stuff from you because you got all new stuff. That's not the custom before. If you were defeated by a country, they would come and take your treasure, they would just loot it, and they would take back everything to their country. They would even take your citizens, impress them into slave labor. They would take the best, finest citizens and do something else with them. If we read on, they selected the most capable captives to serve in the king of Babylon's court. Look at verse 4 and 5, beginning of verse 3 and 4. Then the king ordered the chief of his court officials to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. So they were looking at the best of the best, the cream of the crop. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. So they took the best of the citizens, brought them back, and they were going to use them to serve the king in the royal court of Babylon. So I want to look at the story that follows just 4 of these captives: Daniel, Mishael, Hananiah, and Azariah, and how they face this overwhelming pressure to conform like we may feel today. So I want to look at a couple of forces that went into this, and you can follow along with me in Daniel chapter 1. The first thing I want to point out is, as soon as the captives were brought in, they were renamed. The first step in the attempt to conform is renaming. Look at Daniel chapter 1:7. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, he named him Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. To Azariah, Abednego. All the L's in their names were taken out. Because anytime you see a Hebrew name that ends with E-L, L, that stands for Elohim, or God. It's a reminder of their God. Daniel is, God is my judge, or our God judges. Mishael is, who is like God. He changes Daniel's name from God is our judge to Belteshazzar. Bel, meaning short for Bel Marduk, the chief god of the Babylonians. The chief god of Babylonians protects you. Bel Marduk protects you. That's what his name was changed from God judges, our God judges, to nope, our God protects you. Mishael, whose name means who is like God, very similar to Michael, becomes Meshach, who is like Aku, the moon god. So just taking God out and putting something else in. Hananiah, by the way, anytime you see the AH at the end of a Hebrew name, that is short for, the Anglicization of it is Jehovah, right? It's Yahweh, or the Tetragrammaton, for those of you who are into that kind of terminology. But it's those 4 letters that represent God's name. But anytime you see the AH at the end, it was a name that had to do with what you would find in the King James Version as the Lord all capitalized. Anytime if you're reading King James and it says capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D in the Old Testament, that is Yahweh, or the Tetragrammaton, translated as Lord. Now if you see it with the smaller letters, that's not that word. But Hananiah, whose name meant the Lord is gracious, became Shadrach under the command of Aku, the moon god. Azariah, which means the Lord helps us, becomes Abednego. Abed means servant. Nego, or Nebo, is the fire god. Now some of you have read what happens to these people later, and you're thinking, oh, servant of the fire god. Foreshadowing? Anyway, and you think changing names, is that such a big deal? It is a really big deal, and it's intentional. If you're going to bring these Judean captives into servants of Babylonian, they've got to become Babylonian, and one thing you do is you get rid of their God from their names, and you rename them with something that fits your culture better. George Orwell had this interesting statement. He said, redefinition is the first step to slavery. I'm going to just leave it there for a minute. Redefinition is the first step to slavery. And whether you're thinking about 1984 or Animal Farm, or just the world we live in, it's a very profound statement. Let me ask you this. What do people call you? I mean, in front of your face. But also, maybe behind your back. What titles do you carry? How are you addressed? How have others named you and labeled you? Are you called boss? Are you called intern? Are you called private or captain? Are you called influencer or artist? Are you called doctor or mom or dad or grandma. If you're addressed as a suspect or a defendant, or if you're addressed as a CEO or a teacher or a nurse. And what if you're labeled as smart or dumb or weak or strong or good or bad? Do the labels people give us affect us? Oh, yes, they do. Sticks and stones may break your bones, but words leave permanent psychological damage, right? The way we are addressed, the titles we carry, they do affect the way we think about ourselves, the way we act, and the way we interact with those around us. In philosophy, Althusser would call this interpellation. And not interpolation, but interpellation from the French word appel, name. You are named something to put you in your place, basically, to tell you where you belong. Barthes or Foucault would call this nomination or ex-nomination, that you are named to have a position, or you are, by what they call you, named out of something. Naming is a force to make us act and think in a certain way. But regardless of what we are called, are we really our titles? Are we really what people call us? Is that who we are? Is our identity totally determined by the things people say about us? They renamed Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, so they could try to change their sense of identity, who they were, how they fit into their new kingdom. The second step in the attempted conformity is the feeding. I call it feeding. Look at verses 4 and 5 in Daniel. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they would enter the king's service. 3-year program. Now, it might be said you can't take you can take the boy out of Judah, but you can't take the Judah out of the boy unless you constantly feed him, continually learning and literature and thoughts and food every day of every week of every month of every year for 3 solid years. Then can you take the Judah out of the boy? The feed, the stream never stopped for these Hebrew children, we call them. It continued all the time. It's not that much different for us, is it? That the conformity we face to fit in with certain ideas and designs and certain places we're told we should serve in society is reinforced by a constant stream and feed of thoughts and training and shaping every day of every week of every year, maybe from here on in. So for us, how would such a program, God forbid if something like that existed in our society, how would it change the way we see ourselves and who we are and how we should act? Well, the good part of the story is these 4 guys resist this attempt at conformity. So I want you to look at verse 8, and we'll see one of the first ways it's resisted is Daniel, on behalf of his 3 other friends, resists the feed. Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. So he's saying, look, we don't want to be fed this same thing every day. Can we try something different? Now, Daniel, by the way, these are 4 people I'm talking about out of, I don't know, hundreds. But for us 4 people, me and my 3 friends, can we try something different? He didn't condemn the ones who were on the feed. He didn't express futility by saying, oh, well, it's just what we got. We can't change it. It's just the way the world is now that we're captives in Babylon. We better take what's put in front of us. He didn't do that. He just asked permission to unplug from this feed. He wasn't afraid he would fall behind everybody else who was still on the feed. And by the way, that was a concern. But I just want to let you know it's okay. It turned out okay for these guys. They did all right without it. And in fact, not only did they do okay, they actually did better than the people who remained on the feed. Last year, New York schools, and I mean the state of New York, public schools, instituted a bell-to-bell no cell phone, a bell-to-bell cell phone ban. I just heard a podcast about the results of this. Now, first of all, I thought it would be impossible to even attempt. And, there was some growing pains in getting it instituted in the schools. But I heard interviews with the principal, parents, teachers, and students. And you know what? Even though you could say, well, you can't do that. That's futile to try to take kids' cell phones away in school. You can't do that. Parents will want them to keep the cell phones. You can't, these kids are addicted. You know what? They did okay. Not only did they do okay, they did better than okay. Scores went up. Social interactions improved. Classroom attention improved. Unplugging from the feed worked in New York. New York. You might want to, can we all write our congressman, state senator, governor, hey, just heard of an idea. I'm all for it. I'll sign your petition if you get one started. Romans 12:2 says this, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and prove what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. What if we unplugged and changed our feed? What if I did it? What if you did it? What if we got on a different feed that would bring more positive things into our minds than what we currently have foisted upon us? The second thing that they did, and here we see Daniel specifically resisted the renaming. Now, I'm not saying the others put up with it. I'm just saying Daniel wrote the book, so it's a personal viewpoint. And if Shadrach, Meshach, or Abednego had written books, they might not call themselves Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's possible. But here's what I noticed from Daniel. Daniel never refers to himself as Belteshazzar. He doesn't accept it. In fact, 8, 10, a dozen times, you can do your research, he refers to himself like this, I, Daniel. If I look at a verse here in chapter 10, verse 5, I'll see that he has some backing for this. God is speaking, and he says, but you, Daniel, roll up and seal the words of the scroll until the time of the end. Many will go here and there to increase knowledge. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there before me stood 2 others, one on this bank, one on the other bank. But I want you to notice that this is not the only time he says, I, Daniel. But it comes right after God tells him, you, Daniel. And he says, I, Daniel. He had been named by the king and the royal court and the government and the administration as Belteshazzar. But he didn't go by his government name. God said, you're Daniel. He had a choice. Do I call myself what officially I should be called, what everybody else is calling me, what all the powers that be say I should be, or do I call myself by what God calls me? And he made a decision. I, Daniel, the God judges. We're surrounded by voices that want to tell us who we are, where we should fit. Now, sometimes the voices give you a lot of negativity. They give you negative labels, negative names. If you're new at a job, you're called newbie or a probie, right? And that's to keep you in your place. But you're called sometimes a lot worse than that, right? Negative names come your way. It's just living in the world. That's what happens. You got to be careful about those things. That's what somebody else thinks about you, not necessarily what God thinks about you. But on the other hand, sometimes voices from outside, well, they're sycophantic. Would you say they're sometimes sycophantic? There you go. I used this in I mentioned it in my class last year. We were talking about AI, and the students, coming in, their only reference is ChatGPT. A very uncritical use of AI. And I said, the problem with that is sometimes ChatGPT can just be so sycophantic. And one of my students, brave student, smart student, said, could you explain to us what sycophantic is? I said, that is a great question. And you're a brilliant student to ask it. And you have courage like nobody else in this class to stand up and ask that question. And I think that proves that you just have intelligence far beyond what everybody else in the class does to ask that question. That is awesome that you did that. And he said, got it. Sycophantic is a long way to say suck up or kissing your ring. Here's the thing. Negative voices come that may bring you down. You got to check and see if that's really who you should be. Voices come that suck up to you, that tell you you're great and mighty. Maybe you want to check those out just as well. What do people say? And does it really matter what they say? Let me get to this part, and I used to talk about this more because it's touchy-feely and it gets mushy. And I say I used to talk about it more because I was younger. Now I'm old. I'm a curmudgeon, old dude, grumpy. But it's still true. Let me just share this. What does God call you? Look at 1 John 3:1. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. What do you think of yourself as? Employee, dumb, overweight, ugly? What do you think of yourself as? Peon? Or do you think yourself as, oh, I'm all that and a bag of chips? Here's the thing. You know what God thinks of you? You know what God calls you? His child. You're my child. You've got a choice to say, not really your child. I'm what all these other things say. Or you could just say, I'm your child. God said, you, Daniel. He said, I, Daniel. God says, you're my child. I'm your child. Take his opinion. Take his name for you. Jesus talked to his disciples in John 15:15 and said, I no longer call you servants, because a servant doesn't really know all about the master's business, but I call you friends, because I'm teaching you everything the Father taught me. Oh, I'm just a lowly sinner trying to make it. You know, Jesus said, you're my friend. Have you ever just thought of yourself as, I'm Jesus' friend? I'm a friend of Jesus. That's what he calls you. Lay aside the labels that everything else tries to place on you and just listen to what God thinks about you. You're his child. You're his friend. So the challenges for us is to think about a few things. I think first, think about what's in your feed. What negatives can you remove from your feed? Can you unsubscribe? Can you turn off? Can you just put your... And I am one of the most digitally connected people that I know. This has been my gig for 20 years. I've taught emerging technologies at Clemson, Limestone, and somewhat now, a little less so at SMC. But I work at I'm the chair of a panel of an area of Popular Culture Association, American Culture Association, National Conference, that is digital culture. But I'm seriously entertaining the first thoughts of getting a flip phone. You know, if I can't manage my feed by sheer willpower and discipline, maybe I can do other things to manage my feed, so I can begin to control the negativity. If your feed leaves you feeling mad, angry, depressed, maybe you need a different feed. And by the way, feed is not just from what you get through doom scrolling, the infinite scroll. You never get to the bottom. It's always continually there for you. But it also comes from who you're hanging out with, who's speaking into your life. Some people will just speak into your life in such a way you leave feeling worse than you did when you started talking to them. Can you control that sometime? I think maybe you can cut out some of the negatives. Now, I know you can't cut out all the negatives, because sometimes the negative voices, come from your spouse. A boss. I said boss. Thank you for playing along. But in the places where you can't, then begin to bring in some positive voices to reinforce you. Bring in some good things in your feed. The Bible says whatever things are pure, whatever things are true, whatever things are of good report, the things that edify you and build you up. Think on those things. Read the scripture. Don't ignore the daily Bible verse from, our Bible app. If you're on 360, stay in that. That's a good way to feed your positivity in a world where there's so many negative voices coming your way. Control your feed a little more. Does anybody use Waze as a navigation app? Okay. The Halo voice popped up for Master Chief. I put Master Chief on. He's my navigator now. I got to tell you, it's the most encouraging ride to work every day. All right, soldier, you can do this. We've opened the hush casket. You must be very important. I am. Yeah, I can do it. Take the next left. They'll never see it coming. Oh, yeah, they won't. When I get to work, all right, mission accomplished. Great job. Yeah, it was, wasn't it? It's a stupid little thing, but my choice of navigation voices has made me feel a little bit better in the past few weeks. You can make slight adjustments to increase the voices speaking into your life. What do you think of yourself is the other thing. How do you see yourself? Are there some conforming, untrue ideas that are foisted on you about your identity? Read more. I gave you a couple of verses. Read more about what God thinks about you. Do you know how much you're worth to God? And I heard this little thing just yesterday. Gary, could I give you $10 million? Sure. Oh, great. Now, if I told you I gave you the $10 million, but you wouldn't wake up tomorrow, would you still want it? So you're saying your life tomorrow is worth $10 million, more than $10 million. You're going to get up in the morning and maybe not realize that my life today is worth more than $10 million. That's pretty nice to think about. Think about how much God values you. God thinks you're worth, listen to this, God thinks you're worth the death of his son. The scripture says, if God, who did not withhold his own son from us, but freely gave him up for us, won't he do everything possible for us? It's a sign he likes you. You're valuable in his sight. Think of his opinion over the opinions of others. I had a little piece of paper I pulled off my refrigerator. Little over a year ago, I was driving to a conference in New Orleans. I was crossing the Pontchartrain. If you've ever driven to New Orleans, you know where that is. Big lake. And my phone rang, and I answered it hands-free, of course, for safety. But it was a friend of mine who had just attended a meeting at our university. And he said, we just had a meeting at the university. I said, yeah, I'm at a conference, so I wasn't there. He said, they're shutting the university down. I said, beg pardon? The school started in 1845. It's been going since then. But we discovered on the spur of the moment it was closing at the end of the term. No notice given to students, staff, faculty, just everything's gone. They told me I had to move out all my stuff. I don't have an office to move my stuff into. I got what I wanted. I had to leave literally shelves of books and a collection of journals. I didn't have anywhere to put them. And gone. No salary, no insurance, no benefits, no office to go to, no job. Like that. It was a pretty trying time, psychologically, mentally, spiritually. But we went out to get Chinese food. And there's a little lady that worked at New Asia in Boiling Springs. She wrote on all the little takeout boxes inspiring comments. You know the little rice boxes you get? Put a Bible verse or an inspiring comment. This one she taped to the plastic container for the General Cho's chicken, whatever. I want to read it to you. You are amazing and so worthy of everything. Be kind to yourself and others. Spread love and joy. Jesus loves you so much. God is so, so good all the time. Smile. This has been on my fridge since then. Let me tell you, we went there every week for Chinese takeout. This came at just the right time for me. This was a voice that spoke hope and joy into my life. And you know what I did? I just increased that feed. You know, Chinese food. And these inspiring comments she would write on the boxes. Now, at some point, I think she must have gone back to college or something because we didn't get these anymore. I don't go there so much. But this is going back on my fridge. Here's the thing. You can be a positive part of somebody's feed. You never know what a person is going through when you give them an encouraging word, when you share an uplifting thought with them, when you share love or joy with them. It could be the thing in their feed that turns things around that day for them. Be a positive part of somebody else's feed and call them something that will lift their spirits. It's a challenge for us to do this week and every week.